I am Daniel Hernandez, and I am 36 years old, and this happened to me at a summer camp in the deep woods of Maine a few years back. I'm not the kind of guy who believes in legends or ghost stories. I'm a practical man, a former detective, and a guy who finds humor in the most mundane things, like how people seem to forget the basics of the buddy system, or why you should never go into the woods alone. I was working as a camp counselor, trying to make a decent buck while doing something I loved, being in the outdoors. But what happened to us that summer changed everything. It was the last week of June, and I was part of a small team running Camp Tranquil Pines, nestled against a sprawling forest reserve. The camp was a collection of old log cabins, a mess hall that saw better days, and a lake that glinted like a sapphire under the summer sun. Kids laughed, their echoes bouncing off the trees, and the counselors, me included, enjoyed the rare moments of downtime. My buddy, Frank Hartwell, was the head counselor. Frank was a bear of a man, 6'3", built like a lumberjack and with a laugh that could shake the very ground beneath your feet. He had this knack for making everyone feel at ease, even when the kids were at their worst. Then there was Emily James, our camp nurse, sharp as a tack and with a smile that could light up a room. She was new, having just finished her nursing degree, and was excited to dive into the summer camp life. It was on the third day that things started to feel off. I was walking back from a cabin inspection, the trees casting long shadows across the dirt path, when I heard something, a rustling sound that didn't belong. I paused, listening. It was just a moment, but it felt like the world had gone silent, waiting. Shaking it off as a deer or a squirrel, I continued on. Later that evening, while we were gathered around the campfire, Frank's phone buzzed. He read the message, his face hardening. "We've got a situation," he said, his voice gravelly. A young camper, Jacob Larson, had gone missing. He was 12, a quiet kid who stayed to himself, but he wasn't the type to wander off without telling anyone. And we knew something was wrong. We split into teams, Frank and I taking the north side of the lake, while Emily and a couple of other counselors took the south. The woods were dense, the path barely visible in the moonlight. Frank was in the lead, his flashlight slicing through the darkness. We called out Jacob's name, our voices swallowed by the night. Hours passed. We searched every inch, every hollow log, every thicket. My legs ached, and the fear that gripped my heart was becoming harder to ignore. Just as I was about to call it quits, I saw it. A set of footprints, fresh and leading off the trail, disappearing into the thick underbrush. Frank caught up, his face grim. "We've got something, let's go." We followed the prints, pushing through the brush, the trees now seeming like silent sentinels watching us. The trail led to an old abandoned cabin, its walls covered in moss and ivy. The door creaked as we pushed it open, the inside dark and musty. My flashlight beam flickered over a figure slumped in a corner. Jacob, he was alive but barely. His eyes were wide with fear and his clothes were torn. "What happened?" I asked, kneeling beside him. Jacob's voice was a whisper. He was there. He watched me. I tried to run, but he was too fast. Frank and I exchanged a look. We had no idea what Jacob meant, but the dread that had settled in our bones was now a full-blown storm. We got Jacob back to camp, where Emily took over, her hands steady as she worked on him. The rest of the night was a blur. Police were called, search teams brought in, but no one found anything out of the ordinary. Just the usual wildlife tracks and a lot of unanswered questions. The next day was tense. The camp was abuzz with rumors, kids scared and whispering about the man in the woods. Frank and I went over every detail of the night before, trying to piece together what Jacob had seen. We combed through the woods again, but the only thing we found was an old rusted hunting knife half buried in the dirt. It was blood-stained, the blade dull and the handle worn. More kids reported seeing shadows moving just out of sight, whispers on the wind, and strange noises at night. I wasn't one to believe in ghosts or monsters, but even I started to wonder. Frank, always the skeptic, started getting jumpy, his eyes scanning the trees every time a twig snapped. Then, on a particularly foggy morning, we found it, Jacob's shoes neatly placed at the edge of the lake. The water was calm, the fog so thick you could hardly see 10 feet ahead. We searched the area, Frank and I, our steps echoing in the silence. That's when we found him, the man who had been the source of all our dread. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face hidden under a hood. His eyes were cold, almost lifeless, and his hands were stained with something dark. We stood there, the fog closing in around us, the air thick with the scent of pine and decay. "What do you want?" Frank shouted, his voice breaking the silence. The man didn't answer, just raised his hand, revealing the hunting knife now slick with blood. I drew my weapon, a .38 revolver, the only thing that made sense in that moment. My hands were steady, but the man's expression never changed. "This is over," I said, but he only smiled. A cold, cruel grin that sent shivers down my spine. The fight was quick, brutal. Frank and I moved as one, our training kicking in. The man lunged, but we were faster, the knife clattering to the ground. I had him pinned, the cold steel of the gun against his temple. "Who are you?" I demanded. He laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. "You don't know me?" he said, his voice low, almost amused. "But you will." With a swift movement he twisted, the gun going off, the sound deafening in the fog. Frank fell, blood pooling around him, and I was left staring at the man who had turned our summer into a nightmare. He vanished into the woods, leaving only the echo of his laughter behind. The aftermath was a blur. Frank's death hit everyone hard, and the camp was shut down. Jacob recovered, his nightmares haunting him for months. The police never caught the man. The only lead was a description from Jacob, who said the man had scars on his hands, a result of some kind of old, brutal work. They searched, but he was gone, leaving only his shadow behind. That summer camp was abandoned, left to rot under the weight of unsolved mysteries and whispered fears. I left too, the memories too painful to bear. But the woods still called me sometimes. The echoes of that foggy morning, the scent of pine, and the chilling realization that some things are better left unexplored. The man in the woods never did come back, but every so often when the wind howls just right, I wonder if he's still out there waiting. In the quiet heart of the wilderness, a man can find himself face to face with the primal. 1989, Montana. This wasn't my first rodeo, not by a long shot. I'd wrangled cattle, mended fences, and even dabbled in a bit of moonshine brewing in my younger, wilder days. But what I stumbled upon in the heart of Big Sky Country that autumn was a different beast altogether. I was out hunting elk, tracking a magnificent bull through a thicket of aspen and pine. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves under my boots. It was the kind of day that made you feel alive, connected to something bigger than yourself. Then I heard it, a scream, so blood-curdling it chilled me to the bone. It wasn't the cry of an animal, not a wounded elk or a startled coyote. It was human, filled with terror and pain. I dropped to a crouch, rifle at the ready. The scream had come from a clearing up ahead, a meadow bathed in sunlight. I moved silently, the hunter's instinct taking over. As I reached the edge of the clearing, I saw her, a young woman lying on the ground, her clothes torn, her face contorted in agony. A few yards away, a creature loomed over her. It wasn't a bear, not a mountain lion. It was something else entirely, a hulking figure covered in dark fur, standing on two legs like a man, but with the head of a wolf. Its eyes, glowing yellow in the sunlight, were fixed on the woman. I raised my rifle, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd heard stories of strange creatures in the wilderness, whispers around campfires, but I'd always dismissed them as tall tales. Now I was staring one in the face. The creature turned its head, its gaze meeting mine. A growl rumbled in its throat, low and menacing. It was a warning, a challenge. I fired a shot aiming for its chest. The creature howled in pain. But it didn't go down. It lunged at me, its claws extended, its fangs bared. I fired again and again, the rifle bucking in my hands. The creature staggered, blood seeping through its fur, but it kept coming. I was out of bullets. I dropped the rifle and grabbed my hunting knife, a sturdy blade I'd had since I was a boy. The creature was upon me, its hot breath on my face, its claws raking my skin. We fought, rolling on the ground, a tangle of limbs and fur. I managed to sink my knife into its side, but it barely seemed to notice. It was stronger than any animal I'd ever encountered, faster, more ferocious. I thought it was the end, that I was going to die in that clearing, torn apart by a beast out of a nightmare. But then something unexpected happened. The creature froze, its body trembling. Its eyes, once filled with rage, now held a look of fear. It whimpered a low, pitiful sound. Then it turned and ran, disappearing into the trees as quickly as it had appeared. I lay on the ground, gasping for breath, my body aching, my clothes soaked in blood, mine and the creature's. The woman in the clearing was dead, her throat torn out, her body broken. I could do nothing for her but say a prayer and mark her grave with a cairn of stones. I stumbled back to my camp, shaken and bewildered. I packed my gear and headed for the nearest town, a small outpost nestled in a valley. I told the sheriff what I'd seen, but he just shook his head and chuckled. I knew he wouldn't believe me, not without proof. But I couldn't stay there, not with the image of that creature burned into my mind. I left Montana that day, leaving behind the mountains, the forests, and the memories of that horrifying encounter. I never went back, but I never forgot. The creature, the woman, the clearing, they haunted my dreams, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows of the wilderness. Years passed, and I tried to put it all behind me. I got married, had a family, settled into a quiet life. But the nightmares never stopped. The fear never subsided. I knew I'd never be the same. I'd seen something that day, something that defied explanation. Something that challenged everything I thought I knew about the world. And I knew that out there, somewhere in the vast wilderness, that creature was still out there, waiting, watching, a predator in the shadows, a reminder that the primal is never far away. They found claw marks on the trees, deep gouges that couldn't have been made by a bear or a mountain lion. They found footprints in the soft earth, large bipedal prints that didn't match any known animal. They found traces of blood, not just the woman's, but also a strange, dark blood that didn't belong to any species they could identify. And they found me, sitting in my cabin by the lake, a broken old man haunted by memories he couldn't escape. They believed me. They had to. The evidence was too compelling to ignore. But they never found the creature. It vanished into the wilderness, leaving behind a trail of fear and unanswered questions. Some say it was a rogue wolf driven mad by rabies. Others whisper of a curse, a legend of a man transformed into a beast. But I know the truth. I saw it with my own eyes, felt its hot breath on my face, its claws tearing at my flesh. It was real. It was primal. It was a reminder that the wildness is still out there, waiting to reclaim what was once its own. This happened to me in 12, the year the world was supposed to end, according to that Mayan calendar nonsense. But in the isolated backcountry of the Qualla boundary, the heart of the Cherokee Nation in North Carolina, I, Billy Running Wolf, found myself facing a different kind of apocalypse. I was no hero, just a regular guy working as a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains. A descendant of the Cherokee, sure, but more familiar with Smokey the Bear than the old spirits of the mountains. My days were filled with hiking trails, fixing broken fences, and occasionally shooing away over enthusiastic tourists. Life was simple, predictable, and, dare I say, a little boring. That summer the peace was disrupted, vanishing without a trace in the dense, ancient forest. Search parties combed the trails, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like frantic fireflies, but found nothing. The park superintendent, a no-nonsense woman named Maggie, called me into her office one morning. Her face was grim, her eyes filled with a worry I'd never seen before. We've got another one." This time it was a young couple, avid bird watchers who'd ventured off the beaten path. Their car was found abandoned near the trailhead, a half-eaten bag of trail mix and a pair of binoculars resting on the dashboard. "You're familiar with the old stories, the legends," Maggie said, her eyes searching mine. I knew what she was getting at. A giant horned serpent, a creature of Cherokee lore. I'd always dismissed them as myths, campfire tales to scare kids. But now with the disappearances, the stories took on a chilling new meaning. "I'm not sure I believe in all that," I said, trying to sound confident. Maggie just nodded, a weary look on her face. "Just be careful out there, Billy. Something's not right." I took her words to heart, packing my backpack with extra supplies, a first aid kit, and my grandfather's old hunting knife. I set off into the mountains, the air heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. Days turned into nights, and the forest grew thicker, the shadows deeper. I followed the couple's faint trail marked by broken branches and crushed leaves. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. One evening, as I made camp beside a crystal-clear stream, I heard a sound that sent shivers down my spine. A low growl, guttural and menacing, echoing through the trees. I grabbed my knife, my heart pounding in my chest. I scanned the darkness, my eyes straining to see through the dense undergrowth. A shadow moved, a shape too large to be a bear, too quick to be a human. It emerged from the trees, a monstrous figure illuminated by the moonlight. It was humanoid, but twisted, its skin covered in scales, its eyes glowing like burning coals. Its arms ended in long, sharp claws, dripping with an unknown substance, my body refusing to obey my commands. The creature let out a hiss, its breath like a blast of icy air. It lunged at me, its claws tearing through my shirt, leaving a burning sensation on my skin. I stumbled backward, falling over a tree root. The creature was upon me, its weight crushing my chest, its foul breath filling my nostrils. I struggled, but it was no use. Its strength was inhuman. It raised its claws, ready to deliver the final blow. But then a flicker of light caught its attention. It turned its head, its eyes narrowing. I looked over my shoulder and saw a figure emerging from the trees. It was Maggie, holding a flare gun. She fired a shot, the flare arcing through the air and exploding in a burst of light. The creature shrieked, a sound that echoed through the mountains. It released me and stumbled back, its eyes blinded by the light. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. Maggie fired another shot, this time hitting the creature in the chest. It let out a blood-curdling scream, its body convulsing. It staggered backward, then disappeared into the darkness. Maggie rushed to my side, her face pale and drawn. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. "What was that thing?" Maggie shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know, but it's gone now." We searched the area, but there was no sign of the creature. The forest was silent once more, the only sound the gentle murmur of the stream. We returned to the park headquarters, shaken and exhausted. Maggie immediately contacted the authorities, but they dismissed our story, attributing the disappearances to wild animals and accidental falls. But we knew the truth. We had seen the Arctina, the creature of Cherokee legend. It was a reminder of the ancient forces that still dwelled in the mountains, a warning to those who dared to disrespect the land. The park was closed for the rest of the summer, the trails deserted, the campgrounds empty. The fear lingered, a shadow hanging over the once peaceful mountains. I left the park soon after, unable to shake the memory of the encounter. I returned to my family's land, seeking solace in the familiar rhythms of reservation life. Years later, I still think of the Arctina, its image haunting my dreams. It's a reminder of the mysteries that lie hidden in the shadows, the creatures that lurk beyond our understanding. It's a testament to the power of the old ways, the stories that have been passed down through generations. And it's a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable horror, the human spirit can endure, can find a way to heal and move forward. But the scars remain, a testament to the encounter that changed my life forever. My name is Christopher Nguyen, and I am 38 years old, and what I'm about to share happened to me a few summers back. I was 35 then, a camp counselor at the scenic and supposedly peaceful Crescent Lake Summer Camp in Minnesota. I've always loved the outdoors, ever since I was a kid. There's something about the smell of pine trees and the sound of water lapping against the shore that calms me down. My friends call me Bear because, well, I'm a big guy with a big beard and a love for the wilderness. But this summer, the wilderness had something else in store for me. Camp started like it always did. We had a mix of city kids and local kids, all ready to spend a few weeks fishing, hiking, and making s'mores. I was in charge of the older boys' cabin, along with my co-counselor Randy Bode. Randy was a lanky guy with a perpetual grin and an impressive collection of prank ideas, which kept the boys entertained and us, sometimes, on edge. There was also Bella Fink, the camp nurse who everyone secretly had a crush on, including me. She had a way of making everyone feel safe with just a smile. The first week went by smoothly. The kids settled in and we had the usual campfire stories and ghost tales. Randy, of course, made sure every kid knew about the supposed camp phantom who wandered the woods at night. Just harmless fun. Or so we thought. One evening, Randy and I were prepping for the night's activities when one of the boys, Timmy Jacks, came running up to us. "Bear, there's a weird guy by the lake. He's just standing there staring." We grabbed our flashlights and headed towards the lake. I wasn't too concerned. Sometimes locals would wander near the camp, curious about the noise and lights. But this time, it was different. As we approached the shore, I saw a man standing there just at the edge of the water, his back to us. He was tall, wearing an old tattered coat, and didn't seem to notice us. "Hey, buddy, camp's off limits to visitors." "You lost?" I called out. The man didn't move. Randy and I exchanged glances, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. We walked closer, my flashlight beam cutting through the gathering dusk. When we were about 20 feet away, the man finally turned around. His face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but what I could see of his skin was pale and gaunt. "Just enjoying the view," he said, his voice raspy, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. "Well, you've seen it. Time to move along," Randy said, his tone firm but friendly. The man didn't argue. He just nodded slowly and shuffled off into the woods. We watched until he disappeared, then headed back to the camp. That night after lights out, I lay in my bunk, unable to shake the unease. Something about that man felt wrong. The next morning I mentioned it to Bella while getting my morning coffee. "He probably just wandered too far from his campsite," she said, though her eyes showed a hint of concern. A few days later, weird things started happening. Small things at first, missing tools, cabins left open, food gone from the pantry. We chalked it up to the kids playing pranks. But then one of the younger girls, Lucy, went missing. We found her an hour later wandering in the woods, confused and scared. "Lucy, what happened? Why did you leave the cabin?" Bella asked gently. "I saw him." Lucy whispered, eyes wide. "The man by the lake, he told me to follow him." My blood ran cold. We doubled our efforts to keep an eye on the kids, setting up night watches. Randy and I took turns patrolling the grounds after dark. One night, while on patrol, I saw something move near the edge of the woods. It was quick, a flash of movement, gone as soon as it appeared. I shook it off, blaming my tired eyes. But the next day, another kid, Jason, went missing. This time, we couldn't find him. The police were called. And the camp was put on lockdown. The kids were scared, and so were we. I couldn't help but think of the man by the lake. Was he behind this? 2 nights later, I was on watch again, sitting by the campfire when I heard footsteps. I grabbed my flashlight and stood up, heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice steady. The footsteps stopped. I swung the beam of light around, scanning the trees. Nothing. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. The man from the lake, standing at the edge of the clearing, just watching. "What do you want?" I demanded, my fear giving way to anger. He didn't respond. Instead, he stepped forward into the light. His face was clearer now, sunken eyes staring at me from a hollow face. Before I could react, Randy came up behind me. "What's going on?" he asked. And then he saw the man too. "You again? What the hell are you doing here?" The man smiled, a chilling, unnatural smile. "I'm here for the children," he said simply. That was enough for me. I lunged forward, but the man darted back into the woods. Randy and I chased him, but he was fast, moving through the trees like a shadow. We lost him quickly. When we returned to the camp, Bella was waiting, her face pale. She said, voice trembling, "Jacob's gone." Panic set in. The kids were terrified, the counselors on edge, the police were no help. They searched but found nothing. We decided to keep the kids indoors, not letting anyone out of sight. But the fear was palpable. Who was this man? Why was he doing this? A few nights later, I was patrolling again, this time with a baseball bat in hand. I wasn't taking any chances. As I walked by the lake, I heard a rustling in the bushes. I turned, gripping the bat tighter. "Show yourself," I shouted. The man stepped out, calm as ever. "You can't stop me," he said, voice cold and emotionless. "I'll take them all." Rage boiled over and I charged at him, but he was quick, dodging and weaving through the trees. We chased him deep into the woods, further than we had before. And then he was gone, vanished into thin air. We stood there panting, lost in the dark forest. "This is insane." Randy muttered, "What the hell is he?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but we have to find him. The kids aren't safe." The next day we organized a search party. Randy, Bella, and a few other counselors joined me. We combed the woods looking for any sign of the man or the missing kids. Hours passed and we found nothing. Despair set in. Were we ever going to find them? Then, just as we were about to head back, we stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin. The door was ajar, and inside we found Jason and Jacob tied up but alive. Relief washed over us, but it was short-lived. The man was nowhere to be found. We brought the boys back to camp and the police resumed their search. They found tracks leading away from the cabin but lost them in the dense forest. We tightened security, but the fear lingered. The man was still out there. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the fire staring into the flames, replaying the events in my mind. What did he want? Why the kids? As I pondered, I heard a faint whisper. "Bear." I looked up, scanning the darkness. Nothing. Then I saw him standing at the edge of the firelight, that same eerie smile on his face. "You can't protect them," he said softly. I stood up, heart racing. "Leave us alone," I shouted. But he just laughed, a hollow, chilling sound, and disappeared into the woods. We never saw him again. The camp closed early that year. The kids sent home to their worried parents. The police continued their investigation, but no lead surfaced. The man was a ghost, a nightmare that haunted our memories. Years have passed since that summer, but the fear remains. I still work with kids, but I'm more cautious now. I always keep a watchful eye, always on guard. And sometimes late at night, I think I see a figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching, waiting. Some say it was a drifter, a madman living in the forest. Others believe it was something else, something darker. I don't know what to believe. All I know is that I'll never forget that summer at Crescent Lake and the man who stole our peace. Life goes on and I try to move past it, but some scars never heal. The kids are grown now, living their lives, hopefully free of the fear that gripped us all those years ago. But for me, every rustle in the woods, every shadow at dusk brings back the memories. I've told this story many times, to friends, to strangers, to anyone who would listen. Some believe me, some don't. But I know what happened, and I know that out there somewhere the man from the lake still lingers, a reminder that some nightmares are all too real. This happened to me in 1983. My name's Harlan Gibbs. I spend most days alone, the silence broken only by the rustle of leaves and the occasional shriek of a hawk. It suits me fine. Always been more comfortable with nature than people. Grew up in a small town up north, place called Bayfield, where the trees outnumber the folks 10 to 1. I'd been a park ranger at Sequoia National Park for 8 years now. Mostly it's routine. Checking trails, making sure folks don't do anything stupid, the occasional lost hiker. Peaceful. Until it wasn't. It started with the disappearances. First, a couple young on a weekend trip, vans still in the lot, no trace of them. Then, a lone hiker, seasoned guy, knew the trails poof. Gone. Park Service brought in dogs, helicopters, the whole shebang. Nothing. The unease settled in like a fog. Whispers among the rangers. Bears, mountain lion, serial killer. We kept our eyes peeled. But what can you see in a forest that vast? One evening, I was making my rounds, driving the old Jeep along the dusty trails, sun sinking low, painting the trees in shades of orange and red. Radio crackled with static, the occasional chatter from other rangers, then silence. I stopped at a lookout point, a vista overlooking a valley, miles of dense woodlands stretching out beneath me. Breathtaking usually. It felt ominous, like the forest was holding its breath, watching. That's when I saw it. Down in the valley, moving through the trees. A figure, too tall to be a bear, too broad for a cougar. It moved with a strange, jerky gait, almost a limp. I grabbed the binoculars, felt a chill crawl down my spine. The binoculars brought it closer. Hairless, skin the color of damp earth, long, sinewy arms that swung low, face, I can't describe it, like someone tried to sculpt a human skull but gave up halfway through, and its eyes, dark, empty, like bottomless pits. It was watching me. I could feel its gaze even from that distance. The hair on my neck prickled. My hand instinctively went to the sidearm strapped to my hip. I got in the Jeep, started the engine. Rational thought was fighting a losing battle with primal fear. I needed to report this, but as I turned the Jeep around, I saw it again. Now it was closer, moving up the trail towards the lookout point, that unsettling limp carrying it forward with impossible speed. I floored it. The old Jeep coughed and sputtered, but I'd pushed it hard, tires spitting gravel. I could see it in the rearview mirror, gaining on me. That blank face, those eyes like black holes, getting bigger, closer. The radio crackled back to life. A voice, frantic. Repeat situation at the south. I didn't have time to answer. I slammed on the brakes, the Jeep skidding to a halt at a fork in the trail. One path led back towards the park entrance, the other further into the wilderness. I took the second path, a desperate gamble. I don't know how long I drove, the forest a blur of green and brown. The sun had set, the headlights cutting feeble beams through the darkness. It felt like the creature was everywhere, its presence looming in the shadows, a constant whisper of terror. Finally, the Jeep coughed its last, engine sputtering out. I was deep in the park, miles from any road. I got out, grabbed my flashlight and the rifle from the back. The forest pressed in, a wall of darkness. The silence was deafening. Then a snap, a twig breaking. Close. I swung the flashlight around, the beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing. But I could feel it. Watching. I ran. I didn't know where, didn't care. Just away from that thing. Thorns ripped at my clothes, branches whipped across my face. But I kept running, the fear fueling each step. I stumbled, fell, landed hard on the forest floor. The flashlight clattered away, the darkness absolute. I scrambled for it, found it, the beam flickering weakly. It was standing over me, its face inches from mine. I could smell the damp earth, the musk of something ancient. I could feel its breath, cold and fetid. It reached out a long, bony hand. I closed my eyes, waited for the end. The scream, when it came, wasn't mine. It was a woman's scream, high and piercing. The creature froze, turning its head towards the sound. Then it was gone, melting back into the darkness with a swiftness that defied its size. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline surging through me. I followed the sound of the screams, pushing through the undergrowth, the rifle heavy in my hands. I found them at a small clearing. A young couple, tourists. The woman was hysterical, pointing at something on the ground. The man, his face pale and drawn, was trying to comfort her, his arm around her shoulders. The something on the ground was a body, a man, his face contorted in a mask of terror, clothes ripped and bloodied. His chest was gone. A gaping cavity, ribs spread like broken wings, organs missing. The police arrived, swarming the clearing. They questioned me for hours, their eyes skeptical, their questions probing. I told them what I saw, every detail etched in my mind. They didn't believe me. They chalked it up to shock trauma. The newspapers called it an animal attack. A bear, they said. But I knew the truth. I saw the creature. I saw what it did. The park remained closed for weeks. When it reopened, tourists were back, snapping pictures, hiking the trails. But I still see it in the shadows, hear it in the rustle of leaves. They think I'm crazy. But I know what I saw. And I know it's still out there, waiting, watching. And I know I'll never forget the smell of damp earth and fear. My name is Michael Fitzgerald, and I am 41 years old. And this happened to me in the summer of 1998. I just finished my sophomore year at Michigan State, and I was working as a counselor at Camp Redwood, a rustic camp tucked away in the forests of northern Michigan. It was the kind of place where the air smelled of pine and the nights were filled with the sounds of crickets and distant owls. I loved it. I grew up in Detroit, so the outdoors were a bit of a novelty for me. This was my third summer at Redwood, and I'd made some good friends there. We had a solid crew that year. Mike, our burly head counselor Dana, a no-nonsense but kind-hearted woman who was in charge of the arts and crafts, and Jake, the jokester who handled sports. I was the nature guide, which meant I spent most of my time hiking, teaching kids about plants and animals, and occasionally fishing at the lake. Things were pretty routine until one of the newer counselors, a quiet guy named Sam Healy, didn't show up for the morning roll call. Sam was a bit of an oddball, always keeping to himself, but he did his job well enough. I figured he might have overslept or taken a walk early and lost track of time. It happens. "Anyone seen Sam?" Mike asked, looking around the circle of bleary-eyed counselors. "I saw him last night. He was heading towards the trails after dinner." "Probably just went for an early hike," I said, trying to keep things light. "He'll turn up." But by lunchtime there was still no sign of Sam. Mike decided we should start searching. We split into pairs and fanned out across the campgrounds. I was paired with Jake, and we headed towards the northern trails where Dana had last seen him. "Man, this is weird," Jake said as we walked. "You think he just bailed?" "Nah," I replied. "His stuff's still in his cabin. Besides, he's not the type to just take off." We walked in silence for a while, the only sound being the crunch of our boots on the gravel path. The forest felt different that day, quieter somehow. After about an hour of searching with no luck, we circled back to the main camp to regroup. Mike and Dana were already there, looking worried. "Nothing?" Mike asked. "Not a trace," Jake said, shaking his head. "Well, we need to expand the search," Mike decided. "Trent, take the canoe and check the far side of the lake. Dana, you and Jake take the eastern trails. I'll call the local sheriff just in case." I grabbed a paddle and pushed off in one of the camp's old canoes, heading towards the other side of the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the clear blue sky, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I neared the opposite shore, I spotted something bright red among the reeds. "Sam!" I called out, paddling closer. It wasn't Sam. It was his camp-issued red jacket half submerged in the water. My heart sank. I pulled the jacket out of the water and scanned the area, but there was no sign of him. I paddled back to the camp as fast as I could, my mind racing with possibilities. When I got back, I found Mike and Dana talking to the sheriff, a grizzled guy named Hank who looked like he'd seen his fair share of trouble. "Found his jacket in the lake," I said, handing it over. Hank frowned and examined the jacket. "This doesn't look good," he muttered. We'll need to organize a proper search party. You folks stay put and keep an eye on the kids. We'll handle this." The rest of the day passed in a blur of worried conversations and hushed speculation. By evening, the sheriff had a full search team combing the area, but they found nothing. It was like Sam had vanished into thin air. The next few days were tense. The kids picked up on our anxiety and the usual camp activities felt strained. We did our best to keep things normal, but the absence of Sam hung over us like a cloud. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. Then one night I was woken by a noise outside my cabin. It was faint, like footsteps crunching on gravel. I sat up and listened, my heart pounding. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then I heard it, a low, muffled cry coming from the direction of the woods. I grabbed my flashlight and slipped out of the cabin, careful not to wake my bunkmates. The night was dark, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. I followed the sound, moving cautiously towards the edge of the camp. The cries grew louder as I approached the tree line. "Sam," I called out softly. "Is that you?" No answer. I scanned the area with my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. Something moved just beyond the light, a shadow slipping between the trees. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I pressed on, my curiosity and concern outweighing my fear. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the cries became more distinct. They were coming from a clearing up ahead. I pushed through the underbrush and stepped into the open space. What I saw made my blood run cold. Sam was there, but he wasn't alone. He was tied to a tree, his face bruised and bloody. Standing over him was a man I didn't recognize, tall with wild hair and a crazed look in his eyes. He was holding a knife. The man turned towards me, his eyes gleaming in the flashlight beam. "Stay back!" he hissed. "This doesn't concern you." "Like hell it doesn't," I shot back. "Let him go!" The man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you can stop me? You don't know what you're dealing with, kid." I took a step forward, my hands shaking as I pointed the flashlight at him. "Try me!" Without warning, he lunged at me, the knife flashing in the light. I dodged to the side, my heart racing. I needed to do something, but I was unarmed and outmatched. Then I remembered the whistle around my neck, the one we used to call for help in emergencies. I blew it as hard as I could, the shrill sound piercing the night. The man winced and stumbled back, giving me just enough time to grab a fallen branch and swing it at him. The branch connected with his arm and he dropped the knife, cursing. I swung again, this time aiming for his head. He staggered back, clutching his face. Behind me I heard footsteps approaching. Mike, Jake, and Dana, all armed with whatever they could find. The man took one look at them and bolted into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. "Trent, you okay?" Mike asked, rushing to untie Sam. "I'm fine," I said, panting, "but we need to get Sam to a hospital." Dana checked Sam's wounds and nodded. "He's in bad shape, but he'll make it. Let's move." We carried Sam back to camp and called the sheriff. By the time Hank arrived, the man was long gone. Sam was taken to the hospital and we gave our statements to the police. The next day the camp was buzzing with rumors and speculation. The kids were scared and the parents started pulling them out of camp. Hank and his deputies combed the woods, but they found no trace of the man. It was like he'd vanished, just like Sam had. Camp Redwood closed early that year. The sheriff's department launched an investigation, but they never caught the guy. Sam recovered, but he was never the same. He left camp and moved out of state, and we lost touch. I never went back to Redwood after that summer. The memories were too painful, and the sense of unfinished business lingered. Sometimes I wonder if the man is still out there, lurking in those woods, waiting for his next victim. But life goes on. I graduated, got a job, and moved on with my life. Every now and then, though, I think back to that summer and the man with the wild eyes. I wonder what drove him to do what he did. And I hope I never find out. This happened to me in '92. My name is Chayton Two Horses. I'm a Lakota Sioux born and raised on the reservation. but I took a job as a park ranger out in Montana. The air was different there, crisp and clean, not like the dry, dusty air back home. Still, the mountains had a familiar spirit. I was assigned to a fire lookout tower up in the remote northwest corner of Glacier National Park. This meant hiking up a steep trail every day, hauling supplies on my back. The tower itself was a cramped, lonely place. There was a small bed, a rickety chair, a table stacked with maps and weather instruments, and a radio for contacting base camp. I spent my days scanning the horizon for smoke, keeping a log of other conditions, and trying to ignore the bone-deep solitude. The days were long and quiet, punctuated by the occasional crackle of the radio or the cry of an eagle circling overhead. I had a little propane stove for cooking, and I'd spend my evenings reading paperback westerns or whittling figures out of scrap wood. It wasn't a bad life, but it wasn't an easy one either. One evening, as I was finishing my dinner of canned chili and crackers, I noticed a strange figure moving through the trees below. It was too tall to be a bear, and its movements were too fluid to be a hiker. I grabbed my binoculars for a closer look. Through the lenses, I saw a humanoid creature covered in a thick coat of coarse, matted hair. Its limbs were long and gangly, ending in gnarled hands with claws that glinted in the fading sunlight. Its head was large and misshapen, with a protruding brow and a mouth full of jagged teeth. It moved with an unsettling grace, its eyes fixed on the tower. I felt a chill run down my spine, a primal fear that I hadn't known existed. I quickly locked the tower door. My heart was pounding in my chest. The creature circled the base of the tower, sniffing the air, its claws scraping against the metal ladder. I watched it through the binoculars, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. As darkness fell, the creature retreated into the woods. I spent a sleepless night in the tower, clutching my ranger's knife, every creak and groan of the old structure setting my nerves on edge. I tried to radio base camp, but the signal was weak and intermittent. All I could do was wait and pray for dawn. The next morning I found footprints in the dirt around the tower, huge three-toed prints that were unlike anything I'd ever seen. I followed the tracks for a while, but they soon disappeared into the rocky terrain. I returned to the tower filled with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. Over the next few days, the creature returned every night. It would circle the tower, howling and scratching at the walls, its eyes glowing in the darkness. I tried to scare it off with flares and gunshots, but it only seemed to become more agitated. One night, it managed to climb halfway up the ladder before I drove it back with a burning torch. I could see its face clearly in the flickering light, its features twisted in rage and hunger. It was a nightmare made flesh, a creature from the darkest corners of Lakota folklore. I knew I couldn't stay in the tower any longer. I packed my essentials, radioed base camp for a pickup, and prepared to abandon my post. But as I made my way down the trail, I heard a noise behind me. I turned to see the creature loping through the trees. Its long limbs propelling it forward with astonishing speed. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the creature gaining on me, its ragged breath hot on my neck. I stumbled and fell, the sharp rocks tearing at my flesh. The creature was upon me in an instant, its claws digging into my back, its teeth sinking into my shoulder. I screamed in pain and terror, kicking and thrashing, but it was no use. The creature dragged me into the woods away from the trail. The last thing I saw was the moonlit sky, framed by the branches of the trees. I woke up in a clearing, surrounded by the tattered remains of my clothing. My body was covered in deep scratches and bite marks, and my shoulder ached with a dull, throbbing pain. The creature was nowhere to be seen. I staggered to my feet, disoriented and weak from blood loss. I followed a stream downhill, hoping to find my way back to the trail. As I walked, I noticed strange symbols carved into the trees, crude figures that seemed to depict a humanoid creature with horns and claws. I eventually stumbled upon the trail, my clothes in tatters and my body battered and bruised. I made it back to base camp, where I was met with disbelief and suspicion. My story was dismissed as a hallucination or a bear attack, and I was sent home with a dishonorable discharge. I returned to the reservation, haunted by the memory of the creature and the symbols I had seen. I sought out the wisdom of the elders who told me tales of a Wendigo, a malevolent spirit that they said that the creature I had encountered was a warning, a sign that I had strayed too far from the path of my ancestors. I spent the rest of my days seeking redemption, trying to make amends for the mistakes I had made. I never returned to the mountains, but the memory of the creature and the terror I felt that night remained with me always. It was a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows, a darkness that can consume even the bravest of souls. I never spoke of my experience again, not wanting to relive the trauma or face the skepticism of others. But I knew that the creature was real, a manifestation of the evil that exists in the world. It was a reminder that we are not alone in this wilderness, and that there are forces at work that we cannot comprehend. My name is David Hernandez, and I am 42 years old. And this story took place in 2005 during my summer camp counselor stint at Camp Timber Ridge in Maine. It was my third year there, and I'd started to consider myself a seasoned pro at handling rowdy kids in late-night campfires. I was 25, studying psychology at a small liberal arts college, and had a decent sense of humor. At least, that's what my friends told me. The camp was nestled deep in the woods by a picturesque lake surrounded by dense forests. It was one of those places where cell phone signals were more myth than reality. The camp had been around since the 1950s, and it had that comforting rustic charm log cabins, a mess hall with a creaky wooden floor and canoes that looked older than most of the counselors. That summer I was in charge of a cabin of 12 boys, ages 12 to 14. It was the usual mix of city kids whose parents wanted them to experience nature, and the occasional country kid who already knew how to build a fire better than I did. Among them was Thomas Braddock, a lanky 13-year-old with a mop of curly hair and a knack for trouble. He had a quick wit and a mischievous glint in his eye that made him both endearing and exhausting. The first 2 weeks of camp went by without a hitch. There were the usual pranks: toothpaste in shoes, frogs in sleeping bags, but nothing out of the ordinary. The real trouble began on the third week. It was a humid night and the kids were restless. We had just finished a campfire session where we told ghost stories that seemed to rile them up more than scare them. As I was doing the final head count and making sure everyone was in bed, Thomas came up to me looking more serious than usual. "Hey, Howard," he said, glancing over his shoulder as if to make sure no one was listening. "I saw something weird by the lake today." I sighed, expecting another prank. "What did you see, Thomas?" "A fish doing the Macarena." He shook his head. "No, seriously, it was a man, I think. He was just standing there staring at the water, but he was dressed weird, like in old-timey clothes." I raised an eyebrow. "Old-timey clothes?" "Yeah, like those pictures you see in history books. You know, suspenders, a flat cap, that sort of thing." I chuckled. "All right, Thomas, get some sleep. We'll talk about it in the morning." But the next morning, Thomas was nowhere to be found. At first, I thought he might be hiding as part of an elaborate prank, but after an hour of searching and checking with the other counselors, I started to worry. We organized a more thorough search, combing through the woods and the lake shore. But there was no sign of him. By midday, we had alerted the camp director, Eleanor, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had seen it all. She called the local authorities, and soon we had a small search party, including some of the more rugged locals who knew the terrain better than anyone. As the hours dragged on, a sense of dread began to settle over us. I couldn't shake the feeling that Thomas's story about the man by the lake was somehow connected to his disappearance. That evening, as we gathered the kids in the mess hall to keep them calm and occupied, I found myself staring out the window at the darkening woods, wondering what had really happened. The authorities continued their search well into the night, but there was still no trace of Thomas. The camp was in a state of subdued panic, the usual sounds of laughter and chatter replaced by hushed conversations and worried glances. The next day I decided to check the lake myself. I had to do something, anything, to feel like I wasn't just sitting around waiting. I took one of the canoes and paddled out, scanning the shoreline for any clues. As I neared the far side of the lake, where the trees grew thicker and the underbrush was almost impenetrable, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, half hidden by the bushes, was an old rowboat, looking like it hadn't been used in decades. My curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled the canoe up to the shore and clambered out. The rowboat was covered in moss and leaves, but what caught my eye was a set of footprints leading from the boat into the woods. I followed the footprints, my heart pounding in my chest. They led to a small clearing where I found something even stranger. An old, weathered cabin that looked like it had been abandoned for years. The door was ajar, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as I approached. Inside the cabin was musty and filled with cobwebs. Old newspapers were scattered on the floor, dated back to the 1920s. I noticed a trap door in the corner, partially hidden under a rug. Swallowing my fear, I lifted the rug and pried open the trap door, revealing a set of narrow stairs leading down into the darkness. I hesitated for a moment, but then I heard a faint sound coming from below, a muffled cry. Without thinking, I descended the stairs, my flashlight barely cutting through the gloom. At the bottom, I found a small, dank cellar, and there, chained to the wall, was Thomas. His clothes were dirty and torn, and he looked terrified. "Howard!" he cried when he saw me. "Thank God! Get me out of here!" I rushed to his side and fumbled with the chains, eventually finding an old rusty key on a nearby table. I freed Thomas and helped him to his feet. "What happened? Who did this to you?" He shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "It was the man I saw by the lake. He grabbed me and brought me here. He kept talking about how I was going to be his ticket back. I don't know what he meant, but he was crazy, Howard. Completely insane." We hurried back up the stairs and out of the cabin. Not stopping until we were back at the lake, I radioed for help, and soon we were surrounded by the authorities and the other counselors. Thomas was taken to the camp's infirmary, and I gave a statement to the police about what I had found. As they investigated the cabin and the surrounding area, they discovered more disturbing evidence. Old photographs of children, some dating back almost a century, and a journal filled with ramblings about time travel and eternal youth. The man Thomas had described was nowhere to be found, and despite their best efforts, the authorities couldn't locate him. The camp was shut down early that summer, and the kids were sent home. The story of what happened spread quickly, and Camp Timber Ridge gained a reputation as a haunted place. I never returned to the camp after that, and I eventually finished my degree and became a psychologist, working with troubled youth. He never fully recovered from the ordeal, and the memory of that summer stayed with him, shaping his life in ways neither of us could have predicted. We often talked about that man and what he might have been, but we never found any answers. Looking back, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't taken Thomas's story seriously, if I hadn't gone to the lake that day. Maybe he would have been lost forever, just another name in that twisted man's journal. But we got him back, and that was what mattered. Even now, the memory of that summer sends a chill down my spine, not because of any supernatural fear, but because of the very real human capacity for evil, and that's a horror story that doesn't need any embellishment. I saw a funny meme the other day on Reddit. A cat holding a gun with a caption, "Someone's sleeping on the couch tonight. That cat could teach the brass in the Navy a thing or two about discipline. I know I could. Back home it felt like my wife and kids were those someones, and I was the darn cat. But I ain't complaining. A Navy SEAL don't do that. You get deployed, you do the job. I was on a mission in Brazil. Deep jungle, entail about some nasty weapons trafficking. Nothing to boys and I couldn't handle. Easy like a Sunday stroll, huh, Dex? That's Garcia, big guy, big grin, dumb jokes. Shut it, Garcia, I said. I was point-focused. We'd been trekking for days. Sweat, mud, bugs big enough to bite out a hunk of flesh. Ahead I saw the clearing. Some old mining camp, rusty machinery, with shacks all but swallowed by the green. "That's our target," said Brooks, tapping the mission briefing on his pad. "Fan out, low and slow, eyes peeled," I ordered. The jungle hum was loud, birds going crazy. But something else, a low thrumming like a motor idling. We crept closer, guns up. Then we saw it. Not weapons, no trucks, but a pit. Big one carved in the raw earth. And a shack right on the edge. "What the hell?" whispered Garcia. "Comms. Keep it tight," I said. I heard Brooks reporting back, then static, then screams. "Brooks," I said into the radio. "Only noise." Garcia's face was pale as chalk. "Dex, something ain't right." The thrumming got louder. Then a stench hit us like rotten eggs and something worse. Burning? I motioned for us to circle the shack, stay in cover. We neared the back, and then I saw them. Bodies, dozens piled in a bloody heap, military gear, uniforms, ours. And Brooks was there, strung up, eyes wide, throat. It was gone. "Get back," I hissed, pulling Garcia down just as a figure burst from the shack. It wasn't human. Tall, way too tall, with skin like gray leather stretched tight over bone. Its limbs were long, too long, ending in claws. But it was the head, bald, bloated, with a maw full of jagged teeth. This thing let out a roar, a shriek of pure fury, and charged. We fired, emptying whole magazines. The creature stumbled, but it kept coming. Garcia went down, gun clattering from his hands. He was screaming, and so was I, but there was no time, no chance. I just ran for my life, back into the jungle, the thing's echoing roar fading behind me. I don't know how long I ran or where. The calm was still broken, buzzing with dead air. I was alone, lost, with something out there hunting me. Something that wasn't in any briefing I ever read. Suddenly the trees ahead thinned. There was a river, muddy brown, and on the other side, a road. Salvation? Maybe. I hit the water, scrambling for the far bank. Behind me, a splash. I turned, heart pounding like a drum. The creature was there, wading chest deep, reaching for me with monstrous hands. I raised my gun, aimed, and then a truck came barreling around the bend, tires screeching. Headlights sliced through the darkness, blinding the creature. It hissed, recoiling. I took my chance, lunging out of the river, scrambling up the muddy slope, and diving into the truck bed. The truck roared back down the road. I didn't look back. Didn't speak. Not even when the driver finally stopped, yelling at me in Portuguese. I couldn't tell him. They wouldn't believe me. Who the hell would? The driver turned out to be a logger, and he took me to the nearest town. A stinking little place, barely on the map. But it had a phone, and I called it in. Command some government types, they flew me back to base in a day. I didn't see sunlight for weeks after that. Debriefings, psychologists, the works. They wanted me to spill everything, to relive it over and over. I did. They needed proof, demanded it. I couldn't give them much. No comms recordings, no bodies. The jungle swallows things whole. And Garcia, he was gone. Just like Brooks, just like the others. They called me crazy. Said it was PTSD, the stress. And maybe they were right. How could I explain that thing? It wasn't a bear, wasn't any animal I knew. And the smell, like a slaughterhouse left to bake in the Amazon sun. I was close to losing it. Then one day, a soot brought me a file. Satellite photos, taken right after my escape, focused on that clearing. They asked what I saw. In the photos, the mining camp was still there, the shacks, the pit, all of it. But the bodies, gone. And near the shack, dragged through the dirt, was a huge trail. Something big and heavy had been hauled back inside. That was my proof. That thing had taken its feast. They didn't know what to make of it. Classified the whole damn incident. I was put on desk duty after that. A seal pushing papers? A bad joke. But at least the nightmares eased. A year later I was out. Honorable discharge, pensioned the lot. Tried to go back to a normal life. But it wasn't so easy. People talk about the horrors of war, but they don't know. They don't know what's out there, lurking in the shadows. I got a place up north, out in the woods. Built a cabin myself, good and solid. I keep a shotgun loaded, an axe by the door. Some nights I hear things, branches snapping, odd rustles. And there's that smell again. One day maybe it'll come for me. Maybe that's why I'm still here. But I'll be ready. Won't go down easy like Garcia. Won't be strung up like Brooks. We all got one round in the chamber. The question is, do you save it for yourself or for the monster? I got a good dog now. Big shepherd, smart as hell. He sleeps by the bed, licks my hand when the dreams get bad. We take walks in the woods, him ahead, nose sniffing the ground. He's my early warning system. He keeps me sane. The brass, those Washington bigwigs, they think I'm just some broken vet, PTSD crazy. But they're wrong. I saw things nobody should. And I know there's more of them out there. It's just a matter of time before they find us again. Sometimes, sitting by the fire with a beer, the dog snoring at my feet, I think about putting it all down on paper. A warning in case I don't make it next time. There's always a next time with these things. There's always a hunger. The world's a big place. A lot of dark corners. And some of them hold things worse than your worst nightmares.